The rifle shot cracked through the dawn air as Rosalie Winters tested her aim on a rusting tin, perched on the fence post. The familiar kick of the weapon against her shoulder, a welcome comfort in a world that had suddenly spun beyond her control. At 22, she had thought herself safe from her father's meddling in her future, but last night's announcement had proven how wrong she'd been. "You'll marry Lionel Crowley by month's end," her father had declared over supper, not even bothering to look up from his plate of beans and salt pork. "Man's got 3,000 acres and a cattle operation that'll make this struggling patch of dirt look like a chicken coop." Rosalie loaded another round and squeezed the trigger, imagining the tin can was Lionel Crowley's smug, jowly face. At 45, the man was more than twice her age, with a reputation that stretched across the Montana territory and not for kindness. His first 2 wives had died under circumstances that raised eyebrows but never questions. Money had a way of silencing curiosity in Sweetwater County. "Thought I might find you out here." Her younger sister Abigail appeared at her side, her blonde hair still loose around her shoulders. At 16, she hadn't yet learned to hide her emotions, and fear shone bright in her eyes. "You aren't really going to marry him, are you, Rose?" Rosalie lowered the rifle. "I'll sooner run off with the next dusty cowpoke who rides through than be that man's wife. Pa says he'll disown you if you refuse." "Let him." Rosalie's voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. The Winters Ranch had been her home since birth, but the thought of being sold off like prized livestock made her stomach churn. "I've got till the end of the month to figure something out." The year was 1883, and in Montana territory, a woman without means had precious few options. Teaching was respectable work, but the nearest school was in Helena, nearly 80 miles away. Working as a saloon girl was out of the question. Rosalie had her pride, if nothing else. Miss Winters. Both sisters turned at the unfamiliar voice. A tall man sat atop a chestnut gelding at the edge of the yard, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Dust covered his clothes, suggesting he'd been riding hard and long. "Which one of us?" Rosalie called, keeping her rifle ready but lowered. "The elder Miss Winters, I reckon." He dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent more time in the saddle than on solid ground. As he stepped forward, Rosalie got her first good look at him: tanned skin, dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar, and eyes that reminded her of the sky just before a storm broke. "I'm Rosalie Winters," she said, not extending her hand. "State your business." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Blunt as a hammer, aren't you? Name's Blake Reeves. Your father hired me to break some horses." Abigail stepped forward. "Pa didn't mention hiring any horse trainer. Sent word to Bozeman 2 weeks back. Said he had some Mustangs needed gentling." Blake Reeves tilted his hat back, revealing more of his face. He was younger than Rosalie had initially thought, perhaps 26 or 27, with a scar that bisected his left eyebrow. "If I've come at a bad time." "You've come at the worst possible time, Mr. Reeves," Rosalie said, "but that's hardly your fault. Abby, go tell Pa his horse trainers arrived." Once her sister had scurried off toward the house, Rosalie returned her attention to Blake. "Fair warning, Mr. Reeves. My father's mood is foul these days. Don't take it personal if he barks. I've broken horses for meaner men than your father, I expect." His eyes traveled to the rifle in her hands and the shattered tin cans beyond. "Good shot. Good enough to keep coyotes and unwanted suitors at bay." She hadn't meant to say that last part aloud, but the words escaped before she could rein them in. Something flickered in Blake's eyes: interest, perhaps, or simple curiosity. "Unwanted suitors, huh? Seems a woman who can shoot like you ought to have her pick. In a fair world, perhaps." Rosalie heard the creak of the porch door opening. "But we don't live in a fair world, do we, Mr. Reeves?" "No, madam," he agreed quietly. "We surely don't." Henry Winters was a man whose very posture suggested the hardness of his character. Years of ranching in the unforgiving Montana climate had weathered his face like tanned leather and bent his once straight frame into a permanent stoop. He assessed Blake with suspicious eyes. "Reeves, is it? Didn't expect you so soon." He didn't offer his hand. Blake nodded. "Finished up my last job early. Thought I'd head straight here." "Well, you're here now. My daughter will show you to the bunkhouse. You can start with those Mustangs tomorrow." Henry turned his attention to Rosalie. "And you put that rifle away and help your mother with supper." "Got company coming tonight." The look he gave her made it clear exactly which company was expected. Lionel Crowley would be sitting at their table tonight, eyeing her like a prize heifer. The thought made her skin crawl. "Yes, Pa," she said, forcing the words through clenched teeth. Henry grunted and returned to the house, leaving Rosalie alone with Blake. "This way, Mr. Reeves." She started toward the cluster of outbuildings without waiting to see if he followed. The bunkhouse was small but clean, with 4 narrow beds and a pot-bellied stove in the center. "You'll have it to yourself for now. Hired hands don't usually stay through winter, and it's nearly October." Blake set his saddlebags on the nearest bed. "Much obliged, Miss Winters." She lingered in the doorway, reluctant to return to the house and the preparations for Lionel Crowley's visit. Blake seemed to sense her hesitation. "Something troubling you besides unwanted suitors?" he asked, his voice gentle despite the directness of the question. Rosalie considered telling him it was none of his business, which it wasn't, but something about his steady gaze made her speak the truth. "My father's arranged a marriage for me, to a man I despise." Blake stilled, his hands pausing in the act of unpacking. "I see." "No, you don't." She turned to leave, embarrassed by her outburst. "Forget I said anything. Supper's at 6 if you're hungry, Miss Winters." His voice stopped her. "I don't mean to overstep, but where I come from, a woman's got a right to choose her own path." Rosalie laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Then you must come from somewhere far from Montana territory, Mr. Reeves." "Texas," he said, "and Blake will do just fine." "Texas," she repeated. "Long way from home." A shadow crossed his face. "Home's wherever I hang my hat these days." She recognized the look of someone carrying burdens they preferred not to discuss. It was a familiar expression. She saw it in her own reflection often enough. "Well, Blake from Texas, welcome to Sweetwater. I hope you find it to your liking." "That remains to be seen." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, Rosalie felt as though he could see straight through to her soul. "But I've got a feeling it might be worth staying a while." Supper that evening was a tense affair. Lionel Crowley arrived precisely at 6, bringing with him a bottle of expensive whiskey for Henry and a small box of chocolates for Rosalie. She accepted the gift with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You look lovely tonight, Miss Winters," Crowley said, his gaze lingering too long on the neckline of her best dress. He was a large man, both tall and broad, with a meticulously groomed beard that did little to hide the fleshiness of his face. "Thank you, Mr. Crowley." She took her seat at the table, careful to position herself as far from him as possible. Her mother, Margaret, a woman whose once vibrant spirit had been ground down by years of Henry's domineering ways, busied herself serving the meal. Blake joined them a few minutes later, having cleaned up as best he could. His presence clearly irritated Henry, who had likely intended the meal to be a more intimate introduction between Rosalie and her prospective husband. "So, Mr. Reeves," Crowley said as they ate, "what brings a Texas man all the way to Montana?" "Work," Blake replied simply. "Horse-breaking pays well if you're good at it." "And are you?" "Good at it, I mean." Blake cut a piece of roast beef. "I'm still breathing." "Bad horse-breakers tend to have short careers." Crowley laughed too loudly. "Fair point. Perhaps you could look at some of my stock when you're finished here. I've got a few spirited thoroughbreds that could use a firm hand." "Perhaps." Blake's eyes flicked to Rosalie before returning to his plate. "I was telling Henry just yesterday," Crowley continued, apparently oblivious to the tension around the table, "that what this territory needs is more men of vision, men willing to take what's theirs." His hand moved to rest possessively on the table near Rosalie's. "I've built my empire from nothing, you know. Started with 50 acres and 5 cows. Now look at me." "Very impressive," Blake murmured, though his tone suggested he found it anything but. Rosalie poked at her food, her appetite gone. She could feel her father's expectant gaze, waiting for her to engage with Crowley to show proper appreciation for the match he'd arranged. She couldn't bring herself to play along. "Miss Winters has quite a talent with horses herself," Blake said suddenly. "Saw her riding as I came in. Sits a horse like she was born to it." Crowley frowned, clearly annoyed at the shift in conversation. "Is that so?" "Well, riding is a pleasant enough pastime for a young lady, I suppose, though once we're married, you'll have more important matters to attend to, my dear." Rosalie's fork clattered against her plate, such as running a proper household, of course, entertaining, eventually, God willing, raising our children. Crowley's smile didn't reach his eyes. A rancher's wife has many responsibilities. "I wasn't aware we were discussing wedding plans at the supper table, Mr. Crowley." Rosalie's voice was ice. Henry cleared his throat warningly. "Rosalie, it's quite all right, Henry," Crowley interrupted, his gaze fixed on Rosalie. "I admire a woman with spirit. Makes the taming all the more satisfying." The table fell silent. Even Henry looked uncomfortable at the naked possessiveness in Crowley's tone. Blake's knuckles had gone white around his fork. Margaret rose hastily. "Who's ready for dessert? I've made apple pie." The rest of the meal passed in uncomfortable conversation, primarily between Henry and Crowley about cattle prices and land deals. Rosalie remained silent, answering direct questions with as few words as possible. When Crowley finally departed, with a promise to call again soon, she escaped to the porch, gulping in the cool night air like a drowning woman breaking the surface. The door opened behind her. She tensed, expecting her father's lecture, but it was Blake who joined her, offering a cigarette which she declined with a shake of her head. "That man," Blake said quietly as he lit his own smoke, "is not a good man." Rosalie laughed without humor. "Tell that to my father." "Your father seems more interested in Crowley's land than his character. 3,000 acres and 200 head of cattle by a lot of overlooked flaws." She wrapped her arms around herself against the evening chill. "Pa thinks I should be grateful for such a match." Blake leaned against the porch rail, studying her in the dim light spilling from the house windows. "And what do you think, Rosalie Winters?" It was the first time he'd used her given name. Something about the way it sounded in his deep voice made her pulse quicken. "I think I'd rather take my chances anywhere else than in that man's bed." The bluntness of her words should have embarrassed her, but she was beyond caring about propriety. Blake was quiet for a long moment, smoke curling around his face. "There's always a way out if you want it badly enough." "Is that right?" she asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "And what would you suggest? That I run away with what money to go where? I didn't say it would be easy." He straightened, tossing his cigarette into the dirt and grinding it under his boot heel. "Just that it's possible." Their eyes met in the darkness, and Rosalie felt something shift between them, a recognition, perhaps, or an unspoken understanding. Whatever it was, it made her heart race and her palms sweat like a schoolgirl's. "I should turn in," she said, breaking the moment. "Morning comes early on a ranch." Blake nodded. "That it does. Good night, Rosalie." "Good night, Blake." As she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, Rosalie found herself wondering about the mysterious horse trainer from Texas. There was more to his story than he let on, she was certain of it. And despite herself, she wanted to know what it was. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, with frost silvering the grass and the promise of winter in the air. Rosalie rose early, as was her habit, and slipped downstairs before the rest of the household stirred. The kitchen was cold, the fire having died overnight, and she busied herself rebuilding it and putting coffee on to boil. Through the window, she spotted Blake already at work in the corral. He moved with confidence among the nervous mustangs, his body language calm but assertive. She watched as he approached a particularly skittish mare, speaking words she couldn't hear but could imagine were gentle and reassuring. "That one's got away with horses." Her father's voice startled her. He stood in the kitchen doorway, suspenders hanging at his sides, his shirt wrinkled from sleep. "Seems to," Rosalie agreed cautiously. She poured him a cup of coffee and slid it across the table. "Pa, about last night, nothing to discuss." Henry's tone was final. "Crowley's a good match." "Better than you deserve, truth be told." The words stung more than they should have. "Because I'm so worthless. Because you're headstrong and difficult and most men wouldn't tolerate it." He sighed, some of the hardness leaving his face. "Look, Rose, I'm not getting any younger. This ranch is barely scraping by. Crowley's offering a generous bride price plus the promise of merging our operations when I'm gone. So I'm a business transaction." She couldn't keep the hurt from her voice. "You're my daughter, and I'm doing what's best for this family." Henry drained his coffee cup. "The wedding will be at the end of the month. That gives you 3 weeks to make peace with it." He left without waiting for her response, heading out to where Blake worked with the Mustangs. Rosalie remained at the table, her coffee cooling before her, feeling as though the walls of her life were closing in. Later that morning, she saddled her mare, Penny, and rode out to check the western fence line. It was work that needed doing, but more importantly, it got her away from the house and the suffocating feeling of impending doom that seemed to permeate every corner. She'd ridden for nearly an hour when she spotted a rider approaching from the north. Instinctively, her hand moved to the rifle in its scabbard, but she relaxed when she recognized Blake's chestnut gelding. "Following me, Mr. Reeves," she called as he drew closer. He reined in beside her. "Your pa mentioned the fence needed checking. Thought I'd lend a hand. Did he now?" Rosalie was skeptical. Henry Winters wasn't known for his generosity with hired help. And what does he expect you to be doing with the Mustangs while you're playing fence mender? Blake's mouth quirked in that half-smile she was coming to recognize. "Said the horses needed a rest after this morning's work. Can't push them too hard, too fast." "He's right about that, at least." She studied him, noting the ease with which he sat his horse and the weathered quality of his gear. Everything about him spoke of a man who lived in the saddle. "You really are good with horses. They're honest creatures, no pretense, no lies." He guided his gelding alongside Penny as they continued along the fence line. "Unlike people. Speaking from experience, aren't we all?" He glanced at her. "Your pa seems determined about this marriage." Rosalie's jaw tightened. "He's made up his mind, and you've made up yours to refuse. If only it were that simple," she sighed, watching a hawk circle overhead. "I've got nowhere to go, Blake. No family besides what's here, no money of my own. Pa controls everything." "What about your mother? Does she support this match?" "Ma stopped having opinions the day she married my father." Rosalie's voice was bitter. 30 years of yes, Henry, and whatever you think best, Henry, have worn away whatever spirit she once had." Blake was quiet for a moment. "That what you're afraid of?" "Becoming like her, wouldn't you be?" She met his gaze directly. "I've watched my mother disappear year by year. Lionel Crowley would obliterate me in half the time." They rode in silence for a while, checking the fence posts and mending a section where a fallen tree had damaged the wire. Blake worked efficiently, his hands strong and capable. Rosalie found herself watching him more than was proper, noticing the way the muscles in his forearms flexed as he twisted wire, how his hair curled damply at the nape of his neck. "You never said why you left Texas," she said as they remounted their horses. Blake's expression closed off slightly. "Wasn't much left for me there. Family, dead mostly. Pa died in the war when I was a boy. Ma lasted till I was 19. After that, it was just me and my brother, Caleb." His voice tightened on the name. "He's gone now, too." "I'm sorry." She meant it. Loss was something she understood, even if her own had been more figurative than literal, the gradual erosion of hope and freedom rather than the sharp knife of death. Blake nodded acknowledgement but didn't elaborate. They rode back toward the ranch in companionable silence, the afternoon sun warm on their backs despite the crisp autumn air. As they approached the house, Blake slowed his horse. "What if there was a way out? Would you take it?" Rosalie looked at him sharply. "What are you suggesting?" "Nothing yet." His eyes were serious. "Just asking the question." Before she could respond, Abigail came running from the house, her face flushed with excitement or agitation. It was hard to tell which. "Rose, you've got to come quick. Mr. Crowley's here with a preacher." Rosalie felt the blood drain from her face. "What?" "Pa says they're moving up the wedding, says there's no point in waiting." Abigail's voice dropped to a whisper. "He's drunk, Rose, been at the whiskey since noon." Blake's expression darkened. "When?" "Tomorrow morning." Abigail glanced between them, her young face creased with worry. "Rose, you can't marry him. The things they say in town about how his wives died." Rosalie dismounted, her legs feeling suddenly weak. "Where's Ma?" "In the kitchen, crying." Abigail grabbed her sister's hand. "Please, Rose." "Run away, tonight." Blake had dismounted as well and stood close enough that only the sisters could hear his next words. "The stage passes through Miller's Creek at dawn, 15 miles south. If someone were to be on it, they could be in Helena by tomorrow night." Rosalie stared at him. "Are you serious?" "Never more so." His blue eyes burned with an intensity that stole her breath. I can have 2 horses saddled and waiting behind the barn at midnight, one with a lady's saddle, one with my gear. The implication was clear. He was offering to go with her to help her escape. A man she'd known for barely 2 days. "Why would you do this?" she whispered. "Because no one should be forced into a cage." Something haunted flashed in his eyes. "And because I've seen men like Crowley before. They destroy everything they touch." Hope, wild and dangerous, surged in her chest. "If we're caught, we won't be." His confidence was absolute. "Your pa will be sleeping off the whiskey. I'll make sure the dogs stay quiet." Abigail squeezed her hand. "Go, Rose, I'll cover for you as long as I can." "What about you?" Rosalie asked her sister. "I can't leave you here." "I'll be fine. Pa won't marry me off for a few years yet." Abigail managed a smile. "By then, maybe you can send for me." Rosalie's mind raced, calculating risks, weighing options. Stay and become Lionel Crowley's wife, his property, in the eyes of the law, or flee with a man she barely knew but instinctively trusted. "Midnight," she said finally. "I'll bring what money I can find and some food." Blake nodded once, his face grim but determined. "Pack light. We'll be riding hard." He led both horses toward the barn while Rosalie and Abigail headed for the house, trying to appear normal despite the conspiracy they'd just entered into. Rosalie's heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. The house was in chaos. Margaret Winters moved through the kitchen like a ghost, mechanically preparing food while tears silently tracked down her face. Henry sat in the parlor with Lionel Crowley and a thin, ascetic-looking man who could only be the preacher. Empty glasses and a half-empty whiskey bottle testified to the afternoon's activities. "Ah, there she is." Crowley rose unsteadily as Rosalie entered. "The blushing bride, Mr. Crowley." She kept her voice level with effort. "This is unexpected." Henry waved a dismissive hand. "No sense waiting. Lionel's got the ring. Preacher Jenkins is here. We'll do it tomorrow morning and be done with it." "I've brought a gift for you, my dear." Crowley reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. Inside was a gold ring set with a large ruby surrounded by diamonds. "It belonged to my grandmother." "And your first 2 wives?" Rosalie couldn't help asking. A flash of anger crossed Crowley's face before he masked it with a laugh. "Spirited, just as I said. No, my dear. Each of my wives had her own ring. This one is specially chosen for you." Rosalie forced herself to take the box, though touching anything from him made her skin crawl. "It's very fine. Only the best for my bride." He stepped closer, his breath whiskey sour. "I have plans for us, Rosalie, grand plans." She stepped back, clutching the ring box like a shield. "If you'll excuse me, I should help my mother with supper." Of course." Crowley returned to his seat, already turning his attention back to Henry and the whiskey. In the kitchen, Rosalie found her mother rolling out biscuit dough with mechanical precision. "Ma," she said softly. "Are you all right?" Margaret looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "I tried to tell him, Rose. I tried to make him see reason, but you know your father." "I know." Rosalie set the ring box on the counter as if it burned her fingers. "Ma, I can't marry that man. You haven't got a choice." Margaret's voice was flat with resignation. "None of us do." Rosalie thought of Blake waiting in the barn, of horses saddled in the midnight darkness, of the stage to Helena. She did have a choice, but it would mean leaving everything and everyone behind. "There's always a choice, Ma." She picked up a knife and began chopping carrots. Sometimes it's just a matter of being brave enough to make it. Supper was a strained affair. Crowley dominated the conversation, outlining his plans for combining the 2 ranches and expanding his cattle operation. Henry nodded along enthusiastically, already counting profits that weren't his. Margaret said nothing, serving food and refilling glasses like an automaton. Abigail kept shooting worried glances at Rosalie, who managed to maintain a placid expression despite the turmoil inside her. Blake didn't join them. Rosalie wondered if he was already making preparations for their midnight flight, or if he'd simply chosen to avoid the tension in the house. Either way, she was grateful not to have to pretend normalcy with him watching. After the meal, Crowley insisted on a moment alone with his bride-to-be. Henry ushered everyone else from the parlor, closing the door behind them with a meaningful look that made Rosalie's stomach clench. "Come, sit beside me." Crowley patted the sofa cushion. When she remained standing, his expression hardened. "I said sit." Rosalie perched on the edge of the sofa as far from him as possible. "Mr. Crowley, Lionel, please." He shifted closer. "We're to be man and wife tomorrow, after all. About that." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "This is all happening very suddenly. Wouldn't it be better to have a proper wedding? With guests and what I want," he interrupted, his hand coming to rest heavily on her knee, "is to make you mine as quickly as possible." His fingers dug into the fabric of her skirt. "I've waited long enough, don't you think?" Rosalie fought the urge to slap his hand away. "We barely know each other. We'll have a lifetime for that." His other hand came up to grasp her chin, turning her face toward his. "You're a beautiful woman, Rosalie, spirited, as I said. But you'll learn to be a proper wife." Before she could react, he leaned in and pressed his mouth against hers. His lips were wet, his beard scratchy against her skin, and the smell of whiskey and cigar smoke enveloped her. Rosalie remained rigid, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were dark with something that made her blood run cold. "Yes," he murmured, "you'll do nicely." "I should check on my mother," Rosalie said, standing abruptly. She wasn't feeling well earlier. Crowley smiled, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Of course, get your rest tonight, my dear. Tomorrow begins our new life together." Rosalie practically ran from the parlor, not stopping until she reached the sanctuary of her bedroom. There, she scrubbed at her mouth with the back of her hand, trying to erase the feel of his kiss. Her decision was made. No matter the risk, no matter the uncertainty of what lay ahead, she would not become Lionel Crowley's wife. The hours until midnight crawled by with excruciating slowness. Rosalie packed a small carpet bag with essentials. 2 changes of clothes, her mother's old silver hairbrush, a photograph of her family taken when she was 12, before hardship and disappointment had etched themselves into her parents' faces. She hid the bag under her bed and waited, listening as the house gradually fell silent. Crowley had finally departed around 10, after extracting a promise from Henry that everything would be ready for the ceremony at 9 the next morning. The preacher was staying in the spare room, having been too inebriated to safely return to town. Henry's snores echoed down the hallway by 11, the whiskey having done its work. At 11:30, Rosalie's door creaked open, and Abigail slipped in, her eyes wide in the darkness. "I brought these," she whispered, holding out a small pouch that clinked softly. "Ma's egg money, she told me to give it to you." Rosalie stared at the pouch in disbelief. "Ma knows," Abigail nodded. "She came to my room after everyone was asleep. Said she'd heard you and the horse trainer talking by the barn. Said she wouldn't see you forced into the same kind of life she's had." Tears pricked at Rosalie's eyes. All these years, she'd thought her mother broken beyond repair, her spirit crushed by decades of submission. But perhaps Margaret Winters had simply been biding her time, waiting for a moment when she could make a difference. "Tell her," Rosalie's voice caught. "Tell her I love her, and I'll write when I can. She knows." Abigail hugged her fiercely. "Be careful, Rose, and be happy." The sisters clung to each other for a long moment before Rosalie gently disengaged. "I have to go. It's nearly time." Abigail helped her secure the carpet bag and the food she'd smuggled from the kitchen. Together, they crept down the back stairs and out through the kitchen door, pausing at every creak and groan of the old house. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead in a black velvet sky. Rosalie hugged her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders as they made their way to the barn, keeping to the shadows. Blake was waiting as promised, 2 horses saddled and ready. His gelding, Storm, and Penny already fitted with Rosalie's familiar saddle. He wore his coat and hat, a rifle in its scabbard and saddlebags bulging with supplies. "You came," he said softly, relief evident in his voice. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "Wasn't sure." He helped her secure her belongings to Penny's saddle. "It's a big step, leaving everything behind." "Not as big as marrying Lionel Crowley." Rosalie turned to Abigail. "Remember, if anyone asks, you didn't see or hear anything." Abigail nodded tearfully. "Godspeed, both of you." With a final embrace, Rosalie mounted Penny. Blake swung onto Storm's back, checking the cinch one last time. "Stay close," he murmured. "We'll keep to a walk until we're past the creek, then make time across the open country." They rode out quietly, avoiding the main gate with its squeaky hinges, instead cutting across the south pasture where Blake had noticed a section of fence lying flat. The dogs raised their heads as the horses passed but made no sound, thanks to the scraps of salt pork Blake had fed them earlier. Once they cleared the ranch boundaries, Rosalie felt a weight lift from her chest. Whatever lay ahead, danger, uncertainty, hardship, at least she was free. Free from her father's schemes, free from Crowley's possessive grasp, free to choose her own path. They rode through the night, following game trails and dry creek beds, avoiding the main road where they might be spotted. Blake set a steady pace, occasionally glancing back to ensure Rosalie was keeping up. She rode well, her back straight despite the hour and the emotional toll of the day. When they stopped briefly to rest the horses near a small stream, Blake offered her his canteen. Holding up all right. Better than all right. Despite her exhaustion, Rosalie felt more alive than she had in years. I keep expecting to hear hoofbeats behind us. Your pa won't notice you're gone until morning. By then, we'll be at Miller's Creek. He squinted at the eastern horizon, where the faintest lightning suggested dawn wasn't far off. We should keep moving. They reached Miller's Creek with an hour to spare before the stage was due. The town was little more than a trading post, a livery stable, and a handful of rough cabins clustered around a dusty crossroads. Blake led them to the livery, where a sleepy-eyed stable boy took their horses. 2 tickets to Helena, Blake told the station agent, sliding coins across the counter. The man eyed them curiously. Running off to get hitched, are you? Rosalie tensed, but Blake merely smiled. Something like that. Well, stage should be here in about 40 minutes, weather permitting. The agent handed over 2 paper tickets. It's a rough ride, mind. Roads washboarded something fierce after those rains last week. They waited on a bench outside, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Rosalie fought to keep her eyes open, the adrenaline that had sustained her through the night beginning to fade. Get some rest, Blake said, noticing her drooping eyelids. I'll wake you when the stage comes. What if someone comes looking for me? I'll handle it. There was something in his tone, a quiet confidence, an assurance of capability that made her believe him. Rosalie let her head rest against his shoulder, just for a moment, she told herself. Just to close her eyes briefly, she woke to the rumble of wheels and the jangle of harness. The stagecoach was pulling into the station, a cloud of dust billowing behind it. Right on time, Blake said, helping her to her feet. Ready, Rosalie nodded, suddenly nervous. This was at the point of no return. Once they boarded that stage, there would be no going back to the life she'd known. The coach was nearly empty, carrying only a drummer with his sample cases and an elderly woman returning to Helena after visiting her daughter. Blake handed Rosalie in first, then took the seat beside her, his solid presence reassuring as the coach lurched into motion. They had been traveling for perhaps an hour when Blake stiffened beside her, his gaze fixed on the road behind them through the small rear window. Riders, he said quietly, 3 of them coming fast. Rosalie's heart leapt into her throat. Pa, can't tell yet. His hand moved to the revolver at his hip. But they're pushing their horses hard. The drummer, who had been dozing, woke at their conversation. Something amiss, possibly. Blake's voice was calm despite the tension evident in his posture. Madam, he addressed the elderly woman, I apologize for the disturbance, but there may be trouble coming. If shooting starts, get down on the floor. The woman's eyes widened, but she nodded with surprising composure. Not my first holdup, young man. Not a holdup, Rosalie said. At least, I don't think so. The riders were close enough now that Rosalie could make out details through the dust. Her father led the group, his face contorted with rage even at a distance. Beside him rode 2 of the neighboring ranchers, both armed with rifles. It's Pa, she whispered. And the Dawson brothers. Blake's jaw tightened. The Dawsons are Crowley's men. Do they shoot first and ask questions later, or the other way around? They're not gunmen, if that's what you're asking, just ranch hands who owe Crowley favors. She clutched his arm. Blake, Pa looks ready to kill someone. Not if I can help it. He banged on the roof of the coach. Driver, we've got trouble coming up fast behind. The driver glanced back, saw the approaching riders, and immediately urged the team to greater speed. The coach lurched forward, throwing its passengers against their seats. "Hold tight," Blake told Rosalie as he leaned out the window, revolver in hand. "I won't shoot unless they shoot first." The pursuing riders were gaining despite the coach's increased pace. Henry Winters' voice carried over the rumble of wheels and the pounding of hooves. "Stop that, coach. That's my daughter and she's been kidnapped." The driver hesitated, looking back uncertainly. "Don't stop," Rosalie shouted. "I haven't been kidnapped." "The hell you haven't." Henry was close enough now that she could see the veins standing out on his forehead. "Reeves, you horse-thieving son of a bitch, I'll see you hang for this." One of the Dawson brothers raised his rifle, aiming not at Blake but at the lead horse in the coach team. Blake fired first, his shot deliberately wide but close enough to make the man flinch and lower his weapon. "Next one won't miss," Blake called. "Turn back, Winters, let your daughter go." "She's promised to Crowley," Henry roared. "You've got no right." "I've got every right to choose my own husband." Rosalie leaned out the opposite window, her hair whipping in the wind. "Go home, Pa, tell Crowley the wedding's off." For a moment, it seemed as though Henry might actually listen. He reined his horse back slightly, his expression shifting from rage to confusion. But then the elder Dawson brother spurred forward, rifle raised once more. "Crowley's paying good money to bring you both back," he shouted. "Nothing personal, madam." Blake's second shot hit closer to its mark, kicking up dirt just inches from Dawson's horse. The animal reared in panic, nearly unseating its rider. "Last warning," Blake called. "Next one finds flesh." The driver, perhaps sensing the deadly seriousness of the situation, cracked his whip over the team. The coach surged forward, putting precious distance between them and their pursuers. The Dawson brothers fell back, unwilling to risk further gunfire, but Henry pressed on alone, his face a mask of fury and desperation. "Rosalie," he shouted, "don't do this. You're ruining everything." "I'm saving myself," she called back, tears stinging her eyes despite her resolve. "Goodbye, Pa." The road curved sharply around a stand of pines, momentarily taking them out of sight of their pursuers. When they emerged on the other side, Henry had fallen back, his horse blowing hard from the extended chase. He remained visible in the distance for several minutes, a diminishing figure on the dusty road, before finally turning back toward Miller's Creek. Rosalie sank back into her seat, trembling with the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. "Do you think they'll try again?" Blake holstered his revolver. "Not immediately. Their horses are spent, and they know we're armed and willing to defend ourselves." He glanced at the other passengers, who were watching with wide eyes. "My apologies for the excitement, folks." The drummer cleared his throat. "Correct me if I'm wrong, but did I just witness an elopement?" Rosalie looked at Blake, uncertain how to answer. They weren't eloping in the traditional sense, they weren't even courting. He had simply offered her escape, a way out of an intolerable situation. "Something like that," Blake said, echoing his earlier response to the station agent. His eyes met Rosalie's, a question in their depths. She managed a small smile. "We're figuring things out as we go," the elderly woman chuckled. "Best way to start a marriage, if you ask me. My Harold and I eloped 53 years ago this June. Never regretted a day of it." She patted Rosalie's hand. "Don't you worry, dear. Love has a way of working itself out." Love. The word hung in the air between them. Rosalie studied Blake's face, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar bisecting his eyebrow, the steady blue eyes that had promised her freedom. Was there something else growing between them, beyond their unlikely alliance? The flutter in her stomach whenever he looked at her suggested there might be. The rest of the journey passed without incident. They reached Helena by nightfall, the city's lights twinkling like earthbound stars as the coach descended the final hill. Blake helped Rosalie down, her legs stiff from the long ride. "What now?" she asked as they collected their belongings from the boot of the coach. "Now we find a place to stay." He shouldered his saddlebags. "There's a decent hotel on Last Chance Gulch that won't ask too many questions." The Queen Hotel was a 3-story brick building with aspirations to grandeur that it didn't quite achieve. Still, it was clean and respectable, with a small restaurant on the ground floor and a clerk who barely glanced up from his newspaper as Blake requested 2 rooms. "Just the one available tonight," the man said, sliding a key across the counter. "Second floor, end of the hall. Got a nice view of the mountains." Blake hesitated, looking at Rosalie. "I can take the room," she said quickly. "You could find somewhere else." "No," his voice was firm. "I'm not leaving you alone, not with your father and Crowley's men possibly on our trail." He turned back to the clerk. "We'll take it, and a cot if you have one." The clerk raised an eyebrow but made no comment as he recorded their names in the register. Blake gave his real name but listed Rosalie as Mrs. Reeves, a fiction that brought unexpected color to her cheeks. Their room was simply furnished but comfortable, with a large bed, a washstand, and a window that did indeed offer a view of the mountains, now silhouetted against the night sky. A boy brought up a folding cot shortly after they arrived, along with a pitcher of hot water and 2 towels. "I'll take the cot," Blake said once they were alone. "You get some rest. You must be exhausted." Rosalie was tired, bone-deep tired, but also keenly aware of their unusual situation. Here she was, alone in a hotel room with a man she'd known for 3 days, having fled her home and family to avoid a forced marriage. "Blake," she said as he arranged his bedroll on the narrow cot. "Why did you help me?" "Really?" He straightened, his expression serious. "I told you. No one should be forced into a cage. There's more to it than that." She sat on the edge of the bed, watching him. Most men wouldn't risk their lives for a woman they barely know. Blake was quiet for a long moment, his gaze turned toward the window and the darkness beyond. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost as if he were talking to himself. "My brother, Caleb, he was engaged to a woman named Sarah, sweetest girl you ever met, with a laugh that could light up a room." A muscle worked in his jaw. "Her father decided a cattle rancher wasn't good enough for his daughter, arranged for her to marry a banker instead. Twice Caleb's age, mean as a snake but rich as Midas." Rosalie's breath caught. "What happened?" "Sarah killed herself the night before the wedding." Blake's words fell like stones. Couldn't face a lifetime with a man she despised. Caleb found her. He wasn't the same after, started drinking, picking fights. Got himself shot in a saloon 6 months later over a card game that didn't matter. "I'm so sorry." Rosalie moved without thinking, crossing the room to stand before him, her hand reaching for his. "That's why you left Texas." Blake nodded, his fingers closing around hers. "Too many ghosts. And when I saw the look in your eyes yesterday, that same trapped, desperate look, Sarah, I knew I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again." The truth of his story hung between them, raw and painful. Rosalie understood now, the depth of his commitment to helping her escape, the risks he'd been willing to take. Not just kindness or principle, but a deeply personal mission born of tragedy. "Thank you," she whispered, "for telling me, for everything." His eyes met hers, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. His hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, the touch feather light. "We should get some sleep," he said, his voice rough. "Tomorrow we'll need to figure out our next steps." Rosalie nodded, reluctantly stepping back. "Good night, Blake." "Good night, Rosalie." Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. Rosalie lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to Blake's steady breathing from the cot across the room, her mind racing with questions about the future. What would she do now? How would she support herself? And what of Blake? Would he stay with her? Or was his obligation fulfilled now that he'd helped her escape? Morning brought no immediate answers, but did provide hot coffee and fresh bread from the hotel's restaurant. They ate at a small table near the window, watching as Helena came to life around them. "We should get you some more suitable traveling clothes," Blake said, eyeing her wrinkled dress. "And decide where we're headed next. Where would you suggest?" Rosalie cradled her coffee cup, drawing comfort from its warmth. "I've never been further than Helena in my life," Blake considered. "Denver maybe, or San Francisco, somewhere big enough that your father and Crowley can't easily find you." "That sounds expensive." She hesitated. "I have my mother's egg money, but it won't last long. I've got savings." He leaned back in his chair. "Enough to get us somewhere safe, at least after that." He shrugged. "I'm good with horses, can always find work at a stable or ranch." "Us?" Rosalie couldn't help asking. "You're planning to stay with me?" Blake met her gaze steadily. "Unless you'd rather I didn't." The thought of facing an unknown city alone was terrifying. But more than that, Rosalie realized with a start, the thought of continuing without Blake at her side left an ache in her chest she couldn't quite explain. "I'd like you to stay," she admitted, "but I don't want to be a burden. You've already done more than enough." "You're not a burden, Rosalie." His voice was soft but firm. "Not to me." Something warm unfurled in her chest at his words. Before she could respond, a commotion in the street below caught their attention. A rider was galloping down Last Chance Gulch, scattering pedestrians and raising a cloud of dust. "Looks like the morning stage arrived," Blake observed, turning back to his coffee. Rosalie froze, her cup halfway to her lips. "Blake, that's Abigail's horse." He was on his feet instantly, moving to the window for a better look. "You're right, and that's your sister riding it." They hurried downstairs and out into the street just as Abigail dismounted, her face streaked with dust and tears. She threw herself into Rosalie's arms, trembling from exhaustion and emotion. "Abby, what on earth are you doing here?" Rosalie held her sister at arm's length, checking for injuries. "Did you ride all night?" Abigail nodded, gulping for breath. "Had to warn you, Crowley, he's coming, with guns, real gunmen, not just ranch hands." Blake's expression darkened. "When?" "They left right after Pa got back yesterday, taking the train." Abigail wiped at her face with a grimy hand. Crowley was beside himself, kept saying no one steals what's his and lives to tell about it. Rosalie felt cold despite the morning sun. "How did you get away?" "Ma helped me. Told Pa I was sick with a headache and needed to rest. I slipped out after dark and took Starlight." Abigail glanced nervously up and down the street. They could be here any time. The train would have arrived last night. Blake was already calculating. "We need to leave now, before they find us." "But where?" Rosalie asked, still holding her sister's trembling form. "And what about Abby?" "I can't send her back. Wouldn't expect you to." Blake's mind was clearly racing. "We'll need a wagon, something that won't attract attention, and supplies for a longer journey than I'd planned." "Denver," Rosalie suggested. Blake shook his head. "Too obvious. They'd look for us at major cities." He thought for a moment. "I've got a friend with a ranch in northern Idaho. Territory's still opening up there. Might be a good place to disappear for a while." Idaho. The name conjured images of rugged mountains and endless forests, a wilderness far from the reaches of Lionel Crowley and his hired guns. A place to start fresh, to build something new. "How far?" she asked. "Week, maybe 10 days by wagon." Blake was already moving toward the livery stable. "Stay here, both of you. Keep inside the hotel. I'll be back as soon as I can." While Blake was gone, Rosalie brought Abigail upstairs to their room, ordered a bath sent up, and helped her exhausted sister wash away the dust of her desperate ride. As Abigail soaked, Rosalie questioned her about what had happened after their escape. "Pa was like a thundercloud when he got back," Abigail said, her voice small. "Broke 3 chairs and nearly struck Ma when she suggested maybe it was for the best." Rosalie winced. "And Crowley, cold. That's the only way I can describe it. Like ice. He didn't shout or break things. Just said he'd get you back, one way or another." Abigail shivered despite the warm water. "Rose, he scares me worse than Pa ever did." "He won't find us," Rosalie assured her, with more confidence than she felt. "Blake will make sure of it." "Blake," Abigail repeated, a hint of mischief entering her tired eyes. "You two seem close." Rosalie felt her cheeks warm. "He's been kind, that's all. MMHMM." Abigail's skeptical tone suggested she didn't believe that for a moment. "Kind enough to risk getting shot to help you escape. Kind enough to give up whatever plans he had to accompany you to safety." "It's complicated." Rosalie busied herself folding towels. "He had his reasons." "I'm sure he did." Abigail climbed out of the bath, reaching for the clean dress Rosalie had laid out for her, one of her own, too large for her sister but better than the filthy clothes she'd arrived in. "But I've seen the way he looks at you when you're not watching. That's not complicated at all." Blake returned mid-afternoon with news that he'd secured a wagon and team, along with supplies for the journey. He'd also visited the telegraph office to send a message to his friend in Idaho, asking if 3 unexpected guests might be welcome. "We'll leave at dusk," he told them. "Less chance of being spotted that way. I've paid a boy to watch the train station and the main roads into town. If Crowley or his men show up, we'll have some warning." Rosalie had used some of their limited funds to purchase more practical clothing for herself and Abigail: sturdy skirts, woolen shawls, and boots better suited for travel than her house slippers had been. She'd also bought a small revolver, which now rested in the pocket of her new skirt. Blake raised an eyebrow when she showed it to him. "You know how to use that?" Pa taught all his children to shoot. She checked the cylinder with practiced ease. Said it was necessary in wild country. Smart man when he's not trying to marry off his daughters to monsters. Blake's approval was evident in his voice. "Let's hope you don't need it, but better to have it just in case." They spent the remaining hours of daylight making final preparations, speaking little but moving with purposeful efficiency. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Helena's streets, Blake brought the wagon around to the hotel's side entrance. It was a sturdy farm wagon with a canvas cover, not unlike the ones that had brought settlers west decades earlier. Inside, Blake had arranged blankets, food supplies, and their few belongings. "Not the most comfortable ride," he admitted as he helped the sisters climb aboard, "but it'll get us where we're going." They left Helena as twilight deepened into night, taking the northern road out of town. Blake handled the reins with the same quiet competence he showed in all things, keeping the team at a steady pace that ate up miles without exhausting the horses. Abigail, still worn from her overnight ride, soon fell asleep in the back of the wagon, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. Rosalie sat beside Blake on the driver's bench, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. "Do you think they'll follow us?" she asked softly, mindful of her sleeping sister. "Crowley strikes me as a man who doesn't give up easily." Blake's profile was strong against the night. "But Idaho's a big place. Lots of mountains, lots of forests. Easy to get lost if you want to. And your friend there, will he help us? Marcus Holloway's a good man. Fought with me in the Rangers before settling down with his wife in the Panhandle. They moved to Idaho 3 years back, looking for more elbow room." Blake glanced at her. "He'll help." Rosalie nodded, drawing comfort from his certainty. "Thank you for including Abby in all this. I couldn't have left her behind, not knowing what Crowley might do to get at me." "Family's important." Blake's voice held a note of wistfulness. "You protect your own." "Is that what we are now?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Family, in the silvery moonlight, she saw the corner of his mouth lift in that half-smile she was coming to cherish. "Something like that, maybe, or something else entirely." His hand found hers on the bench between them, warm and calloused and somehow exactly right. Rosalie laced her fingers through his, a simple gesture that felt momentous in the quiet night. They traveled for 10 days, following the route Blake had mapped out north and west through Montana territory, across the Bitterroot Mountains and into the forested wilderness of northern Idaho. They avoided towns when possible, camping instead in secluded meadows or sheltered groves. When supplies ran low, Blake would ride ahead to the nearest settlement, returning with flour and coffee and occasionally a newspaper to keep track of the wider world. There was no mention of a Montana rancher's daughter gone missing, nor of a Texas horse trainer wanted for kidnapping. Either the story hadn't made the papers, or Henry Winters had chosen to keep the matter private rather than risk public embarrassment. The journey was hard but not unpleasant. Abigail recovered her spirits quickly, turning the adventure into a game of sorts, spotting wildlife and learning to build fires under Blake's patient instruction. Rosalie found herself adjusting to life on the trail with surprising ease, her childhood on a ranch having prepared her for physical hardship, if not for the emotional upheaval of leaving everything she'd known. And then there was Blake. Each day brought new revelations about the man who had risked everything to help her escape. She learned that he whistled when he was thinking, that he could name every star in the sky, that he'd once dreamed of being a schoolteacher before life had led him down different paths. She learned that he took his coffee black, but secretly had a sweet tooth, that he could recite long passages of Shakespeare from memory, that he treated animals with a gentle respect that spoke volumes about his character. Most of all, she learned that the flutter in her stomach whenever he was near wasn't going away. If anything, it was growing stronger, deepening into something warm and certain and terrifying in its intensity. They crossed into Idaho on the 9th day, the landscape changing subtly around them: denser forests, steeper mountains, valleys carved by rivers that ran clear and cold. Blake consulted his map more frequently now, searching for landmarks his friend had described in letters. "Should be just over that ridge," he said late on the 10th day, pointing to a line of hills ahead. "Marcus said you can see the whole valley from up there, including his place." The climb was steep, the wagon creaking protestingly as the horses strained against the grade. When they finally crested the ridge, the vista that spread before them took Rosalie's breath away. A broad valley lay cupped in the embrace of mountains, emerald green despite the lateness of the season. A river, silver in the afternoon light, wound through its center. Near the river stood a cluster of buildings: a large cabin, a barn, outbuildings, and beyond them, meadows where cattle grazed. "Holloway Ranch," Blake said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. End of the line. As they descended into the valley, a rider appeared from the direction of the ranch, moving at a gallop toward them. Blake tensed momentarily, then relaxed as the rider drew near enough to recognize. "Marcus," he called, raising a hand in greeting. The man who reined in beside their wagon was tall and broad-shouldered, with a full beard and keen eyes that took in the three travelers with open curiosity. "Blake Reeves," he said, his voice carrying a hint of a southern drawl. "When I got your telegram, I hardly believed it." "You actually rode all the way from Helena," seemed the safest way. Blake introduced Rosalie and Abigail. "We've had some trouble, need a place to lie low for a while." Marcus nodded, his expression sobering. "Your telegram mentioned as much." "Well, any friend of Blake's is welcome at Holloway Ranch. Eleanor's been cooking since your message arrived. Hope you're hungry." Eleanor Holloway proved to be a tiny woman with enormous energy, who welcomed them as if they were long-lost relatives rather than strangers. The ranch house was warm and inviting, filled with the smells of home cooking and the sounds of the Holloways' 3 young children. "You'll stay in the guest cabin," Eleanor declared after serving them a meal that made the previous 10 days of trail cooking seem like a distant memory. "It's not fancy, but it's clean and dry, and no one will bother you there." The guest cabin was a short walk from the main house, a sturdy one-room structure with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and 2 curtained-off sleeping alcoves. It was more privacy and comfort than they'd had since leaving Helena. "This is perfect," Rosalie told Eleanor. "We can't thank you enough for taking us in." "Nonsense. Blake saved Marcus's life during their ranger days. We owe him more than we can ever repay." Eleanor's kind eyes studied Rosalie's face. "Now, why don't you tell me the real story of how 3 strangers ended up crossing 2 territories to reach our doorstep?" Over tea by the fireplace, Rosalie explained everything: her father's arrangement with Crowley, Blake's offer of escape, Abigail's warning ride, and their flight north. Eleanor listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly indignant. "Well," she said when Rosalie had finished, "I'd like to give your father and this Crowley character a piece of my mind. Selling off a daughter like a prize heifer in this day and age, it's barbaric." "It happens more often than you'd think," Blake said quietly from his place by the door. "Not under my roof, it doesn't." Eleanor stood, gathering the empty teacups with decisive movements. "You 3 are safe here for as long as you need. Marcus has been wanting to expand the cattle operation anyway. Blake, you know horses better than anyone. There's work if you want it." After she'd gone, leaving behind the scent of lavender sachet and fresh baked bread, the 3 travelers looked at each other in a moment of shared relief. "We made it," Abigail said, wonderment in her voice. "We really made it. Thanks to Blake." Rosalie's eyes found his across the room. "We owe you everything," he shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. You're both brave as any women I've ever known. Most would have stayed, accepted what fate handed them. Not us Winters girls." Abigail yawned, the long day and good meal catching up with her. "We're too stubborn for our own good," Pa always said. "Seems to me it's exactly stubborn enough," Blake observed with a smile. "Get some rest, Abby. Tomorrow we can explore the ranch." Once Abigail had retired to one of the sleeping alcoves, Rosalie stepped outside onto the small porch, needing a moment to process everything that had happened. The night was clear and cool, stars brilliant above the darkened valley. Blake joined her a few minutes later, offering his coat when he noticed her shiver. "Penny for your thoughts." "I was thinking about home," she admitted, "wondering if Ma's all right, if Pa regrets what he tried to do. You could write to her." Marcus makes trips to the nearest town every few weeks for mail and supplies. Rosalie nodded. "I will, but carefully, if Crowley's still looking for us. He won't find us here." Blake's certainty was reassuring. "This valley's about as far from Montana society as you can get." "What happens now?" she asked, turning to face him. "We just start over, become different people." Blake considered her question. "Not different, just more ourselves maybe, without other people's expectations weighing us down." "And what about us?" The question that had hovered between them throughout their journey could no longer be avoided. "What are we to each other, Blake?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air. "What do you want us to be, Rosalie? I'm not sure." She was being honest. The intensity of her feelings for him was something entirely new. "I know that when I think about the future, you're in it. That seems important somehow." "It is." His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle. "I feel the same way, never expected to, but there it is." "I've never been in love before," she whispered. "Is that what this is?" Blake's smile was slow and warm, reaching all the way to his eyes. "I think it might be, for both of us." When he kissed her, it was nothing like Crowley's aggressive claim of ownership. Blake's kiss was a question, an invitation, a promise. Rosalie answered with her whole heart, her arms going around his neck as she rose on tiptoe to meet him fully. They broke apart after a long moment, both a little breathless. Rosalie rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I'm not rushing you into anything," Blake said, his voice rough with emotion. "We've got time to figure this out, all the time in the world. I'd like that." She looked up at him, seeing her future reflected in his eyes. "A chance to choose, to be sure, then that's what we'll do." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "One day at a time." Winter came to the valley, blanketing the mountains in snow and transforming the ranch into a world of crystalline beauty. The Holloways proved to be more than mere hosts. They became family, embracing the three newcomers into their home and hearts. Blake worked with Marcus, breaking horses and expanding the cattle operation. His expertise with animals and easy way with the ranch hands quickly made him indispensable. Rosalie found her place as well, helping Alina with the children and discovering a talent for garden planning that promised to enrich the ranch's spring planting. Abigail thrived in the freedom of their new life. She helped with the younger Holloway children, learned to cook under Alina's tutelage, and spent hours exploring the valley on horseback, returning with stories of deer sightings and beaver dams, and once, memorably, a black bear fishing in the river. Christmas brought a letter from Margaret Winters, carefully addressed to Miss R. Winters, care of Holloway Ranch. The stage had delivered it to the nearest town, and Marcus had brought it back with other mail and supplies. Rosalie's hands trembled as she opened it, Blake and Abigail watching anxiously. The letter was brief but contained news that changed everything. "My dearest daughters, I pray this finds you both safe and well. Your father would be furious to know I am writing, but what he doesn't know won't hurt him. Mr. Crowley has finally given up his search and returned to his ranch. The story in town is that you eloped with a cowboy, Rosalie. I choose to believe this is true and that you are happy. Your father has been chastened by your departure. He drinks less now and speaks often of regret, though his pride prevents him from saying so directly. As for me, I find I sleep better knowing my girls have escaped a fate like mine. Be happy, my darlings. Live freely. Perhaps someday circumstances will allow us to meet again." All my love, mother. Tears streaked Rosalie's cheeks as she finished reading. "They're safe, and Crowley's given up. For now, at least," Blake cautioned, though relief was evident in his voice. "Best if we stay put a while longer, just to be sure." Abigail hugged Rosalie tightly. "I miss Ma, but I'm glad we're here." "Me too, Abby." Rosalie looked around at the cozy cabin that had become their home, at Blake who had become so much more than their protector, at the life they were building far from Henry Winters' control. "This is where we belong now." Spring brought new beginnings in more ways than one. The valley burst into bloom, wildflowers carpeting meadows that had lain dormant under snow. Rosalie's garden flourished, promising summer bounty. And on a perfect May morning, with the Holloways and Abigail as witnesses, Rosalie and Blake were married beneath an arch of apple blossoms beside the river. "I never thought I'd find happiness again after what happened to Caleb and Sarah," Blake told her as they stood together that evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. "Thought that part of me was closed off for good. And now—" Rosalie leaned into his embrace, her wedding ring catching the fading light. "Now I know better." He kissed her temple, her cheek, finally her lips. "You gave me a second chance at living, Rosalie Reeves, at loving. I plan to spend the rest of my days making sure you never regret it." "I won't," she promised. "How could I regret choosing my own path, choosing you?" As darkness fell and stars appeared above the valley that had become their sanctuary, Rosalie thought about the journey that had brought them here. A desperate escape, a chance at freedom, a love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. Her father had tried to marry her to a stranger, but the cowboy who'd offered her a saddle and a way out had given her something far more precious, a life of her own choosing, with a man who saw her not as property to be claimed, but as a partner to be cherished. And in the end, that made all the difference.